Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on this fast forward planet. Andy Revkin here on the coast of Maine before the end of a tumultuous year and the beginning of a tumultuous year. My Sustain What project is about sustainability, but that includes the sustainability of the information environment. And we can't get much done in the real environment if we don't have a functional, open, transparent information environment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about one of the pillars of the sustainability of the internet, which to me is Wikipedia and its interface with X/Twitter and other things. And I'm really pleased to have Stephen Harrison, who's dug deep on Wikipedia and as a journalist. He's a tech lawyer. We'll find out more about his law practice. And he's down in Texas. And he has a novel out called The Editors, which takes you behind the scene of a place like Wikipedia. Infopendium, I think is the name, and gives you a sense of the tussles and potential disruptive dynamics that can happen when you have a big, powerful packet of information. Information is power, and power attracts all kinds of characters. So, Stephen, it's great to have you on here. And I'm just going to kind of take us through a little bit of why we're doing this chat today. Let me just switch screens so you can understand where we're at. Hold on one second. Here we go. So a few days ago, Elon Musk, with his 210 million or so, whatever, followers, said stop donating to Wokepedia until they restore balance to their editing authority. And he was retweeting a libs of TikTok snap of a this past year's budget, sort of financial plan for Wikipedia, which includes equity and inclusion. And to me, that doesn't seem that controversial because, like, Wikipedia started out mainly English language, and there's the big chunks of the world that you want to have, and big chunks of the knowledge base of the world that you want to have represented. But of course, for Elon Musk, this seems threatening, not surprising. And then I saw Stephen Harrison had weighed in on this. A billionaire disparaging a free internet encyclopedia, literally a plot point in my novel. So that got me interested in your work. I think I've seen some of your tweeting before, and certainly your journalism, your source notes work that had been at Slate, and then now on Substack where I live. And so I got intrigued. I'm reading the novel, The Editors. I'm not even a third of the way through, so I'm going to let you summarize some aspects of it. But this is an interesting moment because here my response to this was to donate to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And I hope that folks who are out there who really are interested in a functioning encyclopedia that's dynamic and real time and not subject to the whims of information dictators will do that as well. We're going to talk about the question of fairness and independence as well. And your source notes, which again started a few years ago at Slate and now is on Substack, is where you live. So we'll start with your journalism, and just tell us a little bit about who you are. What started first, the tech lawyering or the journalism or the writing, and then we'll get to the novel. So who are you, Stephen?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Thanks, Andy. So define yourself. So I am a tech lawyer by trade, and I was working for the company Thomson Reuters at the time, which was a software media company. Right. But I think I've always just, my vocation, avocation, I always flip them apart. But really, I've just always loved writing. And I think that somewhere around age 30, this is so 6 or 7 years ago, I was like, I'm just going to really go for this. And I started pitching pieces, a lot of different places, writing, journalism, creative writing, short stories. And, I was on a business trip in New York. This is probably one of the most serendipitous things that's ever happened to me. And I was on the subway, and this would have been 2016. And I just had the thought, like, when was the subway built? Was it built, around World War II? Was it built earlier? I didn't know. I didn't have, grew up in Texas, didn't have a great understanding of that. And so I looked at the Wikipedia articles that are about the subway and the different train stations and the different lines of the subway. And then I just thought, of course I've come across Wikipedia many, many times, but just this was one of the times I thought about it like most seriously. I was like, who has the time to do this, to make this, and to construct it? And I, got behind the scenes. It's the first time I ever clicked behind the scenes, which we might do later on the show, and looked at an article, looked at its edit stats, and said, it got to see there were two main usernames, and that, it's written collaboratively by a lot of people, but like the most active and the most recent usernames, they were these two. And I thought, well, hey, I might pitch this as a story somewhere. And I reached out to those two guys, and they ended up being a senior in a high school and a college student. And it just was completely subverted my expectations. They're writing this information that millions of people are reading, or curating this information. And it was not at all what I thought. So that was my first piece for the New York Times. And it just really went from there. I had a great thing going with Slate for a number of years, because they had a partnership with Future Tense and Arizona State University to just really dive into Wikipedia as a subject of journalism. And just because there's a Wikipedia angle to everything, these days, how is this being described on Wikipedia? And so I love this beat the past few years, and it's let me kind of, explore about my journalism, get out my first, novel, and it's leading to some other things as well. So I'm pretty grateful for that happened.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about meeting the high school student. And so was that the first time you really sort of said, wow, there's people behind these things? Recently, I did a chat with a woman who's one of the developers at Blue Sky. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I realized Blue Sky has like 24 employees. Mm-hmm. And I think, wow, that's really interesting. And of course, I knew Twitter engineers who I interviewed when Musk took over Twitter, and there was all these wars about and people fighting. But what did you what did you discover when you went behind the scenes? What are these people like? And then we'll get to why it led to fiction.
Yeah, well, I think his name was Ryan Ng, and then there's Shaul. So those are the two. Shaul Picker, and those were the two guys that I met with, and kind of got it set up through the New York Times, and I'd say they were, I kind of wanted them to have, before the interview, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a public interest thing. They're doing this because they care about misinformation or just getting it right. But actually, I think in this case, it was just they were really interested in the subject matter. And I always want to acknowledge this about Wikipedia editors. Sometimes they're not doing this, to try to be the hero. They actually just find it really intrinsically interesting, right? Right. And that kind of stuff, right?
And by the way, for those listening, if you want to find some of the articles that Stephen's talking about, go to his Wikipedia page.
Yeah. Well, I just to draw kind of a distinction, which I think is what Wikipedia editors do. This is a Wikipedia, it's a Wikipedia project page. So it's not quite an article. It's I think someone just did this to kind of curate the pieces that I've written in the past. But I don't myself have a Wikipedia article. We can talk. That's part of the some of the characters in the books are dealing with that. But I personally don't necessarily want a Wikipedia article at this point in time. But and I'd say my reason for that is I've got maybe not every week, but maybe every few weeks, I get an email from someone who's got a real issue with their page. And I just have the sense that for the vast majority of people, it's causing them a lot of grief. Like something is wrong. They think that something is not the way they would want it to be described. Certainly Elon Musk doesn't like the way he's described on Wikipedia.
Right.
And so that's a big thing. But I mean, and just back to Wikipedia editors generally, it's a very interesting thing because like everyone can edit the site, right? And at one point I heard like 1 billion people have accessed Wikipedia. It's open for everybody, but only a very small subset of people do at all, like once, and maybe that's, let's say 100 or 250,000 people. But then there's even a smaller group of super contributors of about 1,500 super contributors that, actually are super, super active. It's a hobby that really takes for them. It kind of aligns with their personalities. And so that's why, when people kind of two things can be true at once. It can be a little bit cliquish on Wikipedia, and it can be really open and anyone can get involved if they want to. It's kind of both things at once. And I find that dynamic really interesting. And sometimes, like a piece like this, I'd have, let's see, like 100K page views on Slate or something like that. But then you find that there are like 24 people behind the scenes that are fighting. It's just a smaller group that's actually participating in the informational, kind of dispute.
Right. And hold on a second, because I'm going to show a little snippet of the conversation I had with some Wikipedians, just so people can get an idea of what we're talking about here with that back end. Hold on one second. So Alex Stinson
is matching human enthusiasm with,
and he wrangles people related to climate. So let's just listen for a second. And these were editors who were from Europe and South Africa, and a woman came in from another part of Africa as well. And there was also the journalist Mark Coffin. You're just going to play like a
with the tools that allow us to organize people with that enthusiasm to get onto the platform. And this big gap of like, where are the problems? How do we find them is really hard. So that citation needed statement thing is actually something we can train AI to look for sentences that ought to have a citation. And we actually, our research team worked with a group of researchers to produce a machine learning model to do just that. But the next step, and we actually are, one of our product teams has a grant out for this, is interpreting like what topics are in a article and what topics do similar articles cover. The kind of epitome example I have for this, and I'll show you, share my screen again, is every geography article ought to have a section on climate change. Or every major city in the world right now is building a climate resilience strategy of some sort. And so I'm going to show you one that I helped a human identify and then work on, and then I can describe like what the theoretical AI version of this might be. So in the article,
so we were talking. I was asking them about whether AI can kind of help the human element know where there are gaps, or contention, where there are hot spots of contention over something. It was just really interesting to have this real-time conversation with people around the world who are filling in the blanks and sort of curating and cleaning up things. And so that's the world that you have dived into journalistically. And it's very different than your normal beat, right? It's not like reporting on climate change. So what has that dynamic meant as a journalist? How does that lead to stories, and what's that landscape like?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of it is reading Wikipedia edits, kind of on the back and forth, and kind of getting a sense of what different editors are arguing, and like what the contentious areas are. I'm just thinking through this. I mean, I've thought about, and I haven't yet had a chance to do it, but you could take the whole long, editorial dispute on Elon Musk and put it through an AI and say, well, what are the key debates, right? What are they going for? I think the other things that are interesting about reporting as a Wikipedia journalist, or to the extent that I've worn that hat in the past, is that you don't know who's behind the edits, right? You have a lot of the editors are editing anonymously, or they're using a pseudonym. I'd say that's still, in the way that it was very common in the early internet, like Usenet chat room days, it's still pretty common on Wikipedia that the editors aren't using their real name. And so that's a different dynamic. And, there's been some famous cases of that where, someone pretends to have all these PhDs and, credentials and stuff like that. But no, they're just an ordinary person and not especially credentialed. Credentials have never really supposed to mean anything on Wikipedia, because it's supposed to be like, well, what's in the underlying sources? And then I think that anonymity can create opportunities for conflict of interest, right? If it's either Elon Musk or someone on his team that's trying to edit his page to make it more favorable to him, or to reflect a certain non-neutral point of view, you know, and then I without, you know, having any evidence for him or for anybody else, you know, we do know of celebrities and billionaires who are doing that to try to influence the online narrative. And it matters so much because what's here on the Wikipedia page very often goes into the AI snippet, goes into journalists, you know, who are working under time pressures, use similar language. And so it reflects this sort of informational narrative. And so I think, yeah, it's just such an interesting beat. I think positives are they can largely do it, you know, from home, right? You know, in the same way that a lot of these people are keyboard warriors. I think that, you know, I have to like be a little bit skeptical sometimes of, you know, what people's motivations are. And then very often though, I have gone to some Wikipedia conferences and I meet someone and they are like two online, you know, opponents or enemies in their editing. And I'm like, I wonder if these people, if they ever met in person, might actually, you know, be friends or, you know, may realize that they have a lot in common. That's happened twice to me now. And I was like, that's kind of interesting that, you know, because you're faceless and because you only have the different arguments that people are raising in text, it can maybe create some animosity that might not be there for an in-person interaction.
Right. And so, and you've been, I'm showing here,
yeah,
this is an image, some images from actual Wikipedian conferences.
Yeah.
These are the humans. And you've done reporting on the ground at this kind of place too. And then it shows up in your novel. And that's where we'll start to talk about the novel too.
Sure.
So what, and you kind of said there's a certain culture to this whole universe. Just describe what the meetings are like. Are they like Star Trek conventions or are they, what are they like?
Yeah, I think, well, no, I guess I haven't been to a Star Trek convention, so I can't really compare. I think that, you know, what is interesting is, you know, among Wikipedia editors generally, there is, you know, what some would say is like a gender bias. I think that like the core Wikipedia contributor at one point it was like 90% male, and now I think it's like 80% male. But it does tend to be that a hobby that is overrepresented by men for volunteers at the conventions, and you can kind of see in the pictures it's closer to a gender balance. I mean, not quite, but like it's a lot closer. And so that reflects the fact that I think a lot of people who are, you know, core contributors don't go to these conventions. One thing that surprised me from my first one is there are a lot of librarians at these conventions, and the interest, you know, libraries and Wikipedia are like very connected to each other. You know, the librarians have an interest in having like a comprehensive and accurate Wikipedia. And, you know, a lot of times there's the thinking that like, hey, if they pull a reference list for a client or a patron of the library, a list of references, why not actually make that a resource that can be used by others, right? For the, you know, so they can be leveraged other times. Let's see. I think there's social things that get done at these conventions or these conferences. There's like Wikipedia racing. You know, at one point, and I dramatize this to some extent in my novel, but at one point there was kind of an issue with, I'd say like the equivalent of Zoom bombing. Like, you know, people would kind of take over the chat and kind of like, and so it was the virtual guests were kind of like actually intruding on what was happening in the real person conversation. I mean, the reason they had the virtual environment is because they wanted it to be open for anybody to attend, right? And so, yeah, I mean, and that created an element of drama. I mean, at one point, I remember in Stockholm, and I think a lot of organizations, or I guess you know, communities are starting to do this. They had like sort of a quiet space if you didn't want to go to like the year end or the party at the end of the conference, or if you were, and you know, maybe you were enjoying it, but you could just use like a quiet place because, you know, it was like sensory overload and all that kind of stuff. They had that quiet space set up, and I think that maybe reflects something about some people in the community, or at least the, you know, concerns that they have with accommodating people.
All right. Well, let's get into the book. What, you know, it's a big jump from nonfiction reporting to, you describe this as a reported work of fiction.
Yeah.
Why that as opposed to, you know, regular nonfiction books? And then we can start to talk about the book.
Yeah. You know, and I had some people approach me about writing a nonfiction book about Wikipedia. I think I had a difficult time getting excited about a nonfiction book about Wikipedia because one, Wikipedia is so vast, right? You know, it's,
right.
And I kind of had sort of like the issue of the week when I was writing source notes for Slate. I was writing about, Elon Musk and Wikipedia, or I was writing about, Donald Trump, some language on his page. And
Right.
I just felt like I could do something that was like a more, like a broader narrative that was more related to people. And then also just right from the beginning, I just had this sort of feel that an internet encyclopedia could be perfect grounds for like a suspense novel, because of the anonymity, the power dynamics, like what if other countries are trying to influence the way information is represented in the Western world. It just seems fertile ground for that. And I just started with it. And I also I think that there's something that fiction can do. And we, as a society, need to think about it a little bit, because it's something that we seem to have forgotten, but it helps you get in people's heads, like people who don't necessarily agree with each other. You can, the quote unquote villain, you can get in that person's head. And so, I just started writing it. And I think I had a journalist character. I had a character who is Nevin, who I would say is based on some people I met who are for-profit Wikipedia editors. They're editing for on behalf of a paying client, which is not permitted by Wikipedia's rules. You're not supposed to do that, especially without disclosure.
Right.
And then I had kind of the young, upstart, super motivated Wikipedia editor who's like trying to kind of climb the ranks of Wikipedia's bureaucracy, or become a power user. And then I had sort of the old timer who, for various reasons, thinks that the project is in decline, kind of has this, nostalgia, but it's a little bit of a destructive nostalgia that wants to bring the project back to what he views as the glory days. So I kind of putting those four perspectives against each other, I thought it could be kind of fun to clash them.
Yeah. So I'm showing the prologue here, and I don't know that there's been another novel that starts out with in this case, a death announcement, and then you immediately jump into the revised section, the editing of the page about the person. And this gets at this reality that you just described, which is that more and more our identities are, people's perception of our identities are shaped by things behind the screen. And what you just described about, sort of professional Wikipedia ghostwriters is really interesting. Had you reported that out separately, in some of your columns, or is there a whole business in kind of outing people who are professional Wikipedia polishers?
Yeah, I wrote for, I did, this is one of my more deeper investigative pieces for 1.0, which was part of Medium at the time. And so it was, a paying outlet, and I wrote about, a number of for-profit paid Wikipedia editors. And, just kind of from talking to them, one of the anecdotes that stayed out to me, when I was talking to one of these guys, is he said, well, I've got a client who's a professional athlete, like picture like a former baseball player. And he says, he really wants to change his photo, which is, Wikipedia photos, they have to be public domain. They can't be, like a glossy Sports Illustrated photo that's copyrighted by the magazine. He wanted to change his photo from the way he looks now, which is like pudgy, overweight, red in the face, to the way he looked, at the time. And I was like, well, and I like that one because that's not so much a misinformation issue. That is a little bit vanity. But you can maybe make an argument, and of course the paid editor did, that this is more representative of the reason this person, or reason the Wikipedia reader would be looking up this person on Wikipedia. And so I liked it because I realized it's not, 100% bad. It's not, it's kind of a dicey area. And, the rules say that you need to disclose if you're a paid Wikipedia contributor, because that is like an inherent conflict of interest, right? You are editing a topic, and if you get certain changes made to that page, that your compensation is contingent on that, right? You just have an inherent conflict of interest. But to your point, if you disclose that as you're required to by the rules, then you are, I think it's fair to say that your edits are super scrutinized and very likely to be reverted. And, even something less controversial, like changing the athlete's photo, you might not be able to get done because you admitted openly, what you're doing. But I being a lawyer, I compare it to, when you're in court, if you're in the jury, that you know that this attorney is representing the defense, or this attorney is representing the plaintiff. But the problem with Wikipedia is you don't know if someone is like formally representing, what they view as an objective view as a truth, or one side or the other. And so that's why I think disclosure is really important. I'm going to be really interested to see it. I've got an intuition that the anonymity of Wikipedia, and it might be caused by like legal changes in like Europe and other regimes. Maybe what we're talking about with Wikipedia being, written by anonymous or pseudonymous contributors might change in the future. We'll see. I saw a question flashed up.
Yeah, I was going to put it back. I didn't want to Kurt Newton over on LinkedIn has talked about students getting involved. An interesting development in the Wikipedia editing community is to have student coursework be directed to improving Wikipedia coverage on a topic. So powerful and inclusive to have student insights live on out in the world in the form of these non-disposable assignments. See Wiki edu. And I think what the value there too is just getting students to understand the back end of things. That information you're presented on the web is curated, is generated by, especially Wikipedia, is generated by a community. What do you think about that? We'll get back to the novel.
I think your main point, I think is right, that it's an important exercise for the students to understand how the information is constructed, and they might realize that something that maybe they thought of Wikipedia as like, oh, this is the official version or something like that. Well, actually, it's people like them. Anyone could be contributing it to, and inadvertently introducing errors. I think for the most part, it is a really good assignment. Because if you have a book report or something, it could either go in the trash and no one can ever read it again, or it could become part of a Wikipedia article that many potentially people can benefit from. But kind of just arguing the other side, I've heard that sometimes that could be difficult if the professor isn't really watching and like monitoring, then the students could inadvertently be putting bad material on Wikipedia. So I think it does need to be like pretty supervised, right, in order for it to be good to everybody. And then another thing that I've heard just kind of by way of criticism is there was a professor who assigned write about like the indigenous tribes, like an indigenous tribe, right? And that's important because they wanted to have representation of those tribes on Wikipedia. But then the criticism at the time was, well, did that now you have an article that's written by someone who has no connection to that tribe. But I guess the counterpoint to that is like, this is just a start, and actually we can kind of with this baseline, this it's often called a stub, like the stub of an article, grow it out and have more people contributing to and making it better. And that's kind of different philosophies on Wikipedia. Some people, what I'm describing is like eventualism. Eventually everything will get improved and maybe better with time.
That point you just made about the anonymity tradition versus what might be necessary going forward seems really interesting. And I'll try to see. I had reached out to Alex Stinson to see if he could come on, or somebody from Wikimedia Foundation. It's a hard time of year to get people.
Sure, yeah.
But that seems to be really, really important because it's kind of a fundamental part of the dynamic. It feels to me like, but as you said, the tradition is you're relying on the authenticity of the content, the source content, distinct from who's putting it there. But that what you said about indigenous people is really interesting too. Is that an active discussion? Do you get the sense?
I think that this idea of whose knowledge is a topic that gets talked about. Like, are we including only, just to stereotype, like white, Western, male, European, that kind of knowledge, or are we including knowledge, from other sources? There's been a lot of discussion over whether oral sources should be used. And, someone might say, well, that could introduce, poor information. Other people might say, well, that's the best way to get like the folklore of the tribe, or, other information on there. You could see maybe there's an argument to be made about how that's different between folklore and then like medical topics. I think, I think why anonymity is so interesting to me. And I liked being a novelist on that one because I didn't have to come down on one side or the other. I could just say, this is really important for this one character who is based in China. There's one who's like needs the anonymity, right? Because it's an authoritarian regime and needs to be, protected, right? You could imagine someone in a country like that who would, and there have been Wikipedia editors who gotten in trouble, been arrested in Russia and Georgia. Not the state, the country. And but then on the other hand, you have people who are abusing anonymity to try to make themselves, oh, I'm not this person, but I am, I'm in fact, editing my own Wikipedia page, or I'm,
Right.
trying to promote my company or something like that. That's obviously self-serving. So yeah, I kind of like the good and the bad of anonymity. Under like American law, like anonymous speech is protected, but I mean, does that need to be Wikipedia's rule or not? We'll see. So yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah, well, that's a really important dynamic. And I have the a line from your novel up here too. That's about this idea of, there's this conversations that are happening, and people don't necessarily really know who each other is. And here's an article. Once the news hit about this magnate, this billionaire, there was a huge amount of dynamics around it. And so, can you give a thumbnail description for folks of your novel, without giving away the punchline? What?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a suspense novel. I'd say that's inspired by Wikipedia. I mean, it's the Infopendium I made different in a number of ways, but it's so it's a suspense novel. And I think what I'm trying to explore is who's behind the information, why might people come into conflict on the site, and and also why the information is so relevant, and then let's see, it's not a spoiler or anything. You can tell from the time frame. It starts December 2019, and it's on the eve of the pandemic, right? So there's that kind of added, like, I'd say, suspense of, we, the reader, know what's going to happen with the pandemics and lockdowns and so forth, but the characters don't know, and we have editors who are based in China who are part of the story as well. And so I think that what I like about it is it's an interesting setting, right? And I kind of got to play with the online space, which truthfully, there aren't that many novels that are like set in like the online space. A lot of times it's kind of a peripheral part of the novel, but it's like not a substantively major part of the plot. Right. And then I got to have the four, and this was kind of like the fun part as a novelist, have the four characters come into conflict in the real world too. And so that's and have physical interactions. And so yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. I'm excited, and yeah, it's a suspense novel about an internet encyclopedia like nothing you've read before. Yeah,
I think that's fair to say, and I'm still enjoying reading it right now. And hopefully people will check it out and learn more about it. I wanted to get back to Elon Musk, because he's in the news in so many ways right now, and his whole, big chunk of his career is about physical things like space, getting into space and boring tunnels and the like. But his most influential moment has come with the campaign and the election, and what's coming next with Doge, and his approach, his sort of imperious approach to the information environment. So I thought we'd check in. You could take us around here a little bit, look at his persona as it's related to Twitter. I mean, as it's related to Wikipedia, and how that tussle takes place around his page there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't doubt, that Elon Musk has sort of ideological differences with Wikipedia, but I also think that for him it's very personal, and I've got, I think the evidence backs that up, because what the piece you're showing, and the one I wrote for Slate back in 2022, he was saying, hey, someone please change my Wikipedia page. It describes me as a quote investor, and right. And he believes that he's an entrepreneur, or he wants to be described as an entrepreneur. Well, I mean, Wikipedia isn't a platform for original research. The Wikipedia editors were pulling from, everywhere from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to various financial publications that said, actually, Elon Musk has a history as an investor. He was an investor in Tesla. He was an investor in SpaceX. He's not necessarily the entrepreneurial figure that he describes himself as, although that's one hat that he wears. And the Wikipedia page, in fact, does say that he's an entrepreneur. So he didn't like that wording, right? You know, and you could think of someone with you know, some might say a big ego, or, you know, a lot of people in business,
Sure.
certainly, you know, taking issue with that. You know, I'm interested in, he describes himself as a free speech absolutist, but I think that in some ways he just doesn't like the fact that he can't control his own narrative on Wikipedia, right? You know, he,
Right.
like the Wikipedia article is by volunteers who I don't think do it perfectly always, but the general intention is to write this about the subject from a neutral point of view, curating from reliable published sources about the subject. And that has created this image of him, and he wants it to be another one, right? You know, so I think that you know, and so he tweeted out on December 23rd, so Christmas Eve. He said, you know, stop donating to Wokepedia, and so it's trying to do all these boogeymans. And I think, by the way, these things put the other person in a difficult position, because like there's not that much nuance when he says stop donating to Wokepedia, but you know, on the other hand, we're trying to have like a discussion about, you know, Wikipedia isn't perfect, but it represents, you know, maybe like a better way of creating or, you know, generating information than, you know, just like the misinformation that's proliferating on X, formerly Twitter, you know.
Right.
And so, you know, Elon, he takes issue with Wikipedia. I mean, at one point he said he wanted to buy it for $4 billion, but of course it's it's run by the nonprofit Wikimedia
Right.
Foundation, you know, and the content itself isn't even created by the foundation. It's just all done by the editors, the volunteer editors. It's like a nonprofit initiative.
Right.
You know, and I think I did read, and I think it's probably right, that this isn't just about trying to get Wikipedia or Wikimedia to have less donations. I think the other point to this is he's trying to disparage Wikipedia as a source of truth, or a potential source of truth, and that he can instead get you know, information on his user-generated content platform, which is X, and which of course he has an inordinate amount of authority. He can, you know, even the conservatives that he's recently banned, like Laura Loomer and stuff like that, he can quash them. So it's really just like directing more and more, you know, authority over the information environment to him.
Yeah. Boy, that issue. Have you reported on community notes at all, or have you checked in on it on X?
I'd like to. I think I got invited to be a community notes contributor. I would just say, just without having looked into it that much, I mean, isn't there, or haven't there been issues if someone, I mean, who decides which community note gets picked? One.
Exactly.
Two is, what if it's so delayed that it's, you know, I mean,
that's been the issue.
You know,
I've done some community noting, and there's eternal delays. And as you know, as Mark Twain said 100 plus years ago, and you know, a lie goes around the world. Now I'd say, you know, 50 times before the truth has got its shoes on.
Sure, yeah.
And that's constant, especially on Musk's own tweets. I keep seeing these queued up community notes, whereas with Wikipedia, it feels like it's much more of a dynamic process. I mean, I don't think it's moment by moment, but certainly it feels like it's a little bit more curated and closer to real time. There's another comment that came in here from Joanne McGarry, who's out in Humboldt County, California. I like that Wikipedia people get together in person. Now I have another book to order at my local independent bookstore. There you go.
Yes, that's good. Yeah.
I made a modest donation to Wikipedia earlier this month and must leave this webcast now, but thanks and Happy New Year from the Redwood Forest. So there you go. Maybe
wonderful. Thanks, Joanne. Yeah.
She's a frequent commenter here. Where do you think this is going? You know, I've described Wikipedia as, it's, to me, it reminds me in sustainability, I've often referred to what's called cathedral building, where, you know, there are certain aspects of what goes on in the world that are implicitly multi-generational. Like no generation is going to solve global warming, or you know, so it's kind of a handoff process. And Wikipedia feels like this is the information environment equivalent. It's a scintillating real-time cathedral that's being built and used at the same time. And as you say, there's still these big questions, coming at it with your legal perspective related to anonymity and the like. It's got competition, and there are these power grabs, and the potential for it to be distorted is there. I could show a little bit of that in a minute. Do you have your own sense of the trajectory here being in a sort of a pretty much an upward direction with Wikipedia? Is it heading or is it potentially just derailable?
Yeah. Oh, good question. I think, I've developed a little bit of an interest in what's the best metaphor for Wikipedia. And so I like cathedrals. I've been reading Pillars of the Earth over this holiday break, so cathedrals are on my mind, I think that, a lot of times, a lot of Wikipedians have you heard of the Encyclopedia Galactica, right?
Yeah.
From Isaac Asimov's book, it's like, maybe we're storing this knowledge and then it'll help the Dark Ages, instead of being 10,000 years, be only 500 years. So it does have this sort of, I think that's both like an optimistic and a pessimistic view at the same time. Like, like we're trying to like store the knowledge, but it's, we're acknowledging that there's like some short-term darkness ahead. Derailable, I think that, AI could potentially, and there's some great Wikipedians and people who have been podcasting and writing about this recently, like it could potentially be weaponized. I'd like to think that there's some controls on Wikipedia. Like for example, to run a bot on Wikipedia takes a special approval. There's, there's different saves. So maybe if it was identified when the AI agent started, interfering, maybe you could go back, but so it's not a total free for all is what I'm getting at. And I think that sort of protects Wikipedia. But I think the biggest danger is like the political industrial complex. Like basically some people are wanting to politicize everything. And right. I don't really know if there's like innocence on either side of this, but like, I think that, if you're just trying to convince a generation or half of a generation that this is woke, can't be trusted, not worth your time, then you lose buy-in, right? And right. We went through all the reasons that Elon's got a self-serving interest to create that narrative. Right. And so yeah, I think that's the biggest risk, because I don't want, someone to say, well, I'm conservative, so I'm not going to contribute to Wikipedia. There's a lot of conservative, truthfully, really a lot of conservatives, libertarians, people of all political stripes, because we're more than our politics. Like people, it's aspirational in a sense, but, Wikipedia's policy is neutral point of view, right? Like aim to write it from a neutral point of view. And we don't, Wikipedia editors don't always get there, but I think that's the goal, certainly.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that impresses me so much. Obviously, it's a human enterprise, and as Wikipedia acknowledges in its principles, they're not, neutrality is a journey. It's not there. And I was really interested. David Rosado, who's in New Zealand, he's a data analyst, did a report for Manhattan Institute, which is libertarian. Looking at this question, is it politically biased? And he came out with a kind of a modest conclusion. So he used this methodology for sentiment, just sort of tracking the sentiment around discourse or within a written tract. And his baseline, it's very interesting. The baseline average sentiment with which a set of illustrative terms are used in Wikipedia articles. And he looked at some classic examples, Hitler, Goebbels, Pol Pot from Saddam Hussein. And, they're described pretty negatively in terms of sentiment. And then there's Nelson Mandela, Frederick Douglass, Mother Teresa. So that gives you so there's your thermometer right there, cold and hot. And then he applied it to U.S. presidents, senators, governors. And there he came out with kind of a sentiment bias. Although this gets into this discussion of whether someone is fundamentally bad or not.
Yeah.
Is there a baseline? Is there an objective judgment call for someone's motivations and character? But his conclusions were interesting. Mild to moderate tendency to associate public figures ideologically aligned right of center with more negative sentiment than public figures ideologically aligned left of center. And his last point, though, he's clearly a fan of Wikipedia. We want to acknowledge Wikipedia's significance and valuable role as a public resource. We hope this work inspires efforts to uphold and strengthen Wikipedia's principles of neutrality and impartiality. And, you know, I would love to have him on the show. I tried to get him on. I think he might be on vacation or something. But this is a discussion to have, I think, going forward, too. And, you know, there's as I said earlier, just a minute ago, about how you describe something isn't always distillable into a simple way, you know, someone's motivation or sentiment or honesty or intent. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, well, I was glad to, I mean, I read the piece just before the show, and I kind of had the same reaction you did. I think that I was sort of expecting a Wikipedia hit piece, like an attack.
Sure,
and it could easily have been that. Yeah, and it's more nuanced. It's better, and I think that. So thanks to David for that. I like to listen to his episode or join his show. If he comes back on. I think, you know, one thing. It's a bit of a talking point, but it's true. I mean, Wikipedia was founded by Jimmy Wales, who has libertarian instincts and kind of sees it through a libertarian lens of like, okay, everyone, you know, without compulsion, without, you know, some sort of centralized authority, like the information gets curated. And there's a libertarian lens, by the way, to see, of course, to Wikipedia, you know, and why it works. You know, I think that I would wonder if on the people that he named, you know, it's Wikipedia is reflecting the information that's in reliable sources. A lot of times reliable sources, you know, it gets derided as this, but, you know, it's a lot of times that's the mainstream media. To the extent there's any bias in the mainstream media against, you know, right-wing or right-leaning, I should say, you know, politicians, Supreme Court justices, et cetera, then that goes into Wikipedia then. And you know, you might say, well, a lot of journalists, I don't think it's fair to say that journalists, you know, are uniformly one party or the other, but maybe the model of a journalist's role is to hold truth to power. That might be, you know, a sentiment that is in the underlying source and then comes through to Wikipedia as, you know, emotional, you know, anger, disgust, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, I think that what I like about the piece or the article that he wrote is, you know, some people point to something that they disagree with or they think is wrong on Wikipedia, an article or a subset of articles, and then they say, throw it out, right? Like, I'm done with Wikipedia, don't use it, don't trust it, that kind of thing. That doesn't seem to me like to be the best example. I mean, you know, there is an opportunity for improvement to the extent there are biases, and these things are changing over the time. Maybe over time we'll find that, hey, it's skewing in a different way. So I think that'll be interesting to see. And you know, I appreciate Rosado writing the piece in sort of this like thoughtful, data-driven way, and not as an attack piece, as I said. It might just be me, but I can't hear you right now, Andy. Can you hear me?
You're right. My dog.
Okay, yeah. Oh, no worries. Yeah. I say my best stuff on mute, so that like
no. My dog is barking. I didn't want to overwhelm the chat. I was saying, no, I really want to encourage people to go both to your find you wherever you are, but certainly sourcenotes.blog is your Substack, and you're still on various platforms, including X. And the book is available now in audio book as well, right?
That's right. And I myself had some thoughts. I was like, how is this going to translate to audio? And then I listened to it and I really liked it. Like, it's, you know, they found a good way to like bring out, there's kind of like a computer voice. There's you know, the voices of the different editors. It comes through. They like you can see there, it's got a both a woman and a man narrator, and they do a pretty good job with it. So yeah, I encourage people to check it out, the editors.
That's great. Well, here's a funny comment. I'll throw it on the screen just for the heck of it. Mary Mangan says, wasn't there a copy of Wikipedia launched into space with the Tesla in the glove box? Is this true? I would find that hard to believe.
I don't know. Yeah, that I kind of remember something like that. There is something called like Wikipedia in a box where they condense it, get the article, or at least the text dimension of every article into like a flash drive or a hard drive. And there, I don't know if it went to space with the Tesla. I do know like in like some remote parts of Africa, like a doctor will use that to just have access to everything on Wikipedia. Even if they don't have internet connectivity there.
That sounds like a good thing to have. Yeah, and the one of the issues and opportunities that came up in that conversation I had with the Wikipedians several years ago is maximizing the capacity for countries that are still, not nearly as online as we all are to be part of the conversation. And Wikipedia is basically a conversation. So that's key.
And that's why, woke DEI gets to be such a buzzword nowadays. But if you can look at some of the grants specifically, right, like with more nuance than you get on an X post, right, a lot of it is like, okay, this group or this community in Africa wants to get more involved in Wikipedia, or they want to train people to get more involved in Wikipedia, and people want to have, sometimes it's a fairly big populated area that doesn't have that much coverage on the encyclopedia.
For sure.
Right. That's a pejorative.
And it's a way to label a whole chunk of discourse. Yeah. When you look at the budget and you look at, in fact, many people might not even realize Wikipedia is a grant-making organization, that Wikimedia Foundation, that they are directing resources to communities to help facilitate the kind of dynamics and dialogue that would be necessary for it to reflect human knowledge writ large. Is that something you had kind of dug in on or not realized yourself early on?
Yeah, well, and it came from, I was just starting to get so many emails from people saying, I just want to know where my dollars are going. And I was like, okay, well, that seems legitimate. But then I was seeing, I found the Wikimedia Foundation, and in the way that I think a lot of nonprofits sort of have to be by law, is actually pretty transparent about where the money goes. I mean, you can see different, down to the level of salaries for different roles. And,
right.
I think I want to give fairness, to, speak in fairness to like some of the critics. I think some people are saying like, if there's a dollar, should that dollar be allocated to improving Wikipedia as a product, like the software and behind the scenes, or should that go to the grant, to a grant to another organization? That's a legitimate conversation to have. I mean, there's like, I'd say one thing that gets brought up a lot is people are like, oh, Wikipedia is very hard to edit on mobile. But by the way, I've heard from the other side that it's, no matter how great they make the app, it's always going to be a little bit hard to edit Wikipedia on mobile because it's so heavily text-based. It's not, it's and so I kind of see both. It's like, is that a good investment to improve I think because of the way so many people access the internet now is mobile, it probably is a good investment, but will the customer ever be happy with how the Wikipedia editing experience is on mobile? I'm not sure. That might be sort of an unsolvable problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be a dynamic conversation.
Yeah.
And the transparency, that's where the transparency and sort of authenticity of people in the conversation feels like it's important. So that aspect that you brought up earlier in the context of the legal questions is relevant here too. Who's having the discussion? How do you make those prioritizations is important. I really value the time we spent here, and I think there's potential to do more on this going forward. The information environment, as I said earlier, is a keystone component of having a functioning biogeophysical and social environment. They're completely interlaced now. You can't know what's going on the planet without knowing where to go to check the validity of that issue. That's why I probably am going to do a show at some point on community notes to try to dig beneath the surface there. I have a feeling there's one person maybe in the whole planet who's monitoring community notes from the inside or something. I think Wikipedia has got a way better model for having information curated dynamically and having it go forward. And the work of Stephen Harrison is has key value in figuring out how to do this going forward too. Oh, there's one more comment from Christopher Yan. Let's see what he says here. I joined the workforce in 1969, the global workforce. There was no affirmative action, only sexism and racism. 40 years of affirmative action has served America well. Kill affirmative action and racism will be the void. We already see this with reversal of R versus W. And, I think that's an important point. Having Wikipedia start in a certain mainly white, mainly male dynamic needs work. And that means putting funding and other support systems into place to make sure it's reflective of the world. I think that's a big point you've made in your reporting too. So thanks, Christopher, for weighing in there from Facebook. And I think we'll call it there. We're getting toward the end of the year. Everyone's got a lot to do. This will be shareable as soon as we're done on all these platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Facebook, and you can post it on Blue Sky. There's no way to have it simul stream there yet, etc. And Stephen Harrison, again, great to get to know you a little bit. I'm a fan of sourcenotes.blog and of your book, and have a good 2025.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Would love to come back. That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so that's a wrap for this edition of Sustain What, which is conversations aimed at driving a little bit of progress, facing complexity and consequence. This is Andy Revkin signing off. Happy New Year soon, and make it a happy one. Yeah, that takes work. Hold on one second.